The game of the weekend, the Texas Longhorns traveled to Athens, Georgia to take on the Georgia Bulldogs. This game 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. The Longhorns' first ever trip to Athens. They bring a 7-2 record, a 4-1 record in the SEC against the Georgia Bulldogs, who are 8-1 overall, 6-1 in the league, their final SEC game of the season. For Texas, a third loss would extinguish any and all playoff aspirations, more than likely, but they are coming off their second bye week of the season. And that rest could provide a bit of an advantage, given that the Longhorns are going to have a couple weeks to heal up, a couple weeks to prepare. And Steve Sarkisian with extra time, I would think he's going to have a pretty good offensive plan for a Georgia team that looks like they're playing their best football. And for Georgia, they lose this game, obviously removes them from the SEC championship conversation. It almost certainly removes them from contention of being a top 4 seed. And it also probably removes the possibility of a home playoff game. But Georgia's surging. They're coming off their best performance of the year in a 41-21 road victory in dominant fashion against Mississippi State. They looked really impressive offensively. They have kind of all year, but it was probably the best the run games looked all year. They went for over 300 yards on the ground. Question number 1. Has Texas fixed their offensive line woes? Now, to understand this year's matchup, you got to first analyze last year's 2 games in which Georgia and Texas teed up. The narrative was absolutely determined in the trenches. Last year, Georgia's defensive front, they completely overwhelmed Texas's offensive line. In the SEC championship game, they sacked Quinn Ewers 6 times. In their regular season meeting there in Austin, they sacked him 7 times. So in 2 games, Georgia's defense was able to accumulate 13 sacks against the Texas Longhorns. Texas just flat out couldn't block them. The good news for Texas is that this is not the 2024 Georgia defense. The 2025 unit's pass rush has been less than stellar. They have just 11 sacks this year, but they did look a little bit better last week in getting after the opposing quarterback. They did lose a key defensive tackle, Jordan Hall, for the year against Florida. They just don't have a super twitchy front. They're big and they're physical and they're really built to stop the run more than they are built to rush the opposing quarterback. And Texas offensive line was a kind of a weak point for most of the season. It does feel like right now, though, based on the last couple of performances, feels like they found a little bit of stability. They took their center, Cole Hudson. They moved him to left guard. That was a position that he'd played in the past. They insert Connor Robertson at center, and now they have a more veteran front, and the realignment has made a pretty big difference, and it was really noticeable with the pass protection they received against the Vanderbilt Commodores last time out. Question 2, has Arch Manning hit his stride? Now, he's first-year starter, and he had some struggles early on. There were some challenges. He missed a couple throws. The mechanics weren't great. He has really come through it on the other side, though, based on how he's played these last couple weeks. Now, the stats, pretty solid. Over 2,100 yards, 18 touchdowns. He does have 6 interceptions. But Steve Sarkisian, he's going to put a plan in place that will probably lean on the quick game. We'll try to get Arch Manning into a nice rhythm early. And I think Arch in this game needs to be very calm, needs to be surgical, needs to be opportunistic when using his legs. That's one thing that he has that his predecessor, Quinn Ewers, did not have, is that he can take off if for whatever reason Georgia gets a little too aggressive in blitzing or rushing the quarterback. He also needs to avoid trying to make those off-balance throws. That's what Georgia's defense always seems to force, and those off-balance throws can be off target, and that's when Georgia can make plays on the ball. But if you look at this Georgia secondary, they're pretty good. They are pretty good. 210 yards a game given up through the air, but the non-existent pass rush from the defensive line does force the secondary to cover for a really long time at times. And against these wide receivers, that might not be ideal. Question 3. Can Georgia's rushing attack continue to flex against a great run defense? Now, Georgia's offense is built on running the football, 200 yards a game on the ground. And that attack last week really exploded. It was a season-high 303-yard performance against Mississippi State. And Nate Frazier, he became the bell cow last week. There were times in which it was him and Bowens, and you weren't really sure who was going to be the guy. Bowens at times after a fumble became the guy, and now Frazier's back in good standing. Well, he just had a career-high 181 yards. and had a touchdown on just 12 carries. When you're looking at 15 a clip, pretty good in the SEC. And you look at the 59-yard touchdown run and the speed that was on display, the guy's the real deal. He's a home run hitter coming out of the backfield. In Texas, their entire defensive identity is built to stop the run. Now, they have an elite second level. Their linebackers are awesome, led by Anthony Hill. They allows about 78 rushing yards a game. That's the second best mark in college football. Is a physical, is a fast, is a disciplined unit that is designed specifically to shut down the opponent's rushing attack. Question 4, can Gunnar Stockton continue to be super efficient? He has been a model of efficiency all season long. He's an outstanding college quarterback, dual threat capabilities. The numbers are not going to just blow you away, but the interception numbers, just 2 picks on 258 attempts, goes to show you how smart he's playing for a first-year starter. He also always provides the element of being able to run the football. He has 7 rushing touchdowns this year, and you watch him when he was at his best. That was against Ole Miss. He accounted for 5 total touchdowns in that performance against the Rebels on 26 of 31 passing. Against Mississippi State, he was very solid as well. 3 touchdowns through the air, 264 yards. His primary directive in this game, though, is to protect the football, allow the offense to kind of lean on the rushing attack and kind of grind things out. But the Longhorns do give up some yards through the air. It was on display against Vanderbilt. Diego Pavia hit some big plays down the stretch, but in the first 3 quarters of that game, their offense at Vanderbilt was held mostly in check. So I think the passing yardage might be a bit inflated. I think they'll play well in this game. The question number 5, which QB do you trust more? That's kind of, I don't love asking that question right now, but in this game, I feel like the teams are very similar. Now, I think Texas, their challenges at times this year have been on the offensive side, and particularly along the offensive line. Well, Georgia's challenges this year have been kind of on the defensive side, particularly along the defensive line, which is really rare. They also have had some vulnerabilities in the back end because they haven't had that pass rush that they've always been able to hang their hat on. So when you look at these two teams, I think they're very, very similar from a personnel standpoint and kind of across the board. Which quarterback do you trust more? Do you trust the ceiling that you get with Arch Manning, knowing that he can make any throw on the football field, and when his feet are set and when he's decisive, he can drive it into very tight windows? And it does appear, after the last few weeks, it appears like he's starting to become the best version of himself, really starting there in the 4th quarter against Mississippi State, carrying over into the Vanderbilt game. Can he sustain the momentum that was created in those last 5 quarters through the bye week and into a hostile environment? Or do you trust Gunnar Stockton, who has been very, very steady all season long, but will be going against a better defense in Texas than what Georgia will put up against when they're going against Arch Manning? I'm taking Texas to win the game. I think Texas has a slightly higher ceiling on the offensive side than we've seen so far. We saw it in a gotta-have-it situation against Oklahoma. The offense played smart. They were able to establish the run. And Arch Manning, I think, will play the best game of his career on arguably the biggest stage of his career when he takes his team into a hostile setting and potentially hands the Georgia Bulldogs their 2nd loss of the year.